What if standing up for your rights made you an enemy of the powerful? Imagine this. You're a Gold Star mother, a parent who lost a child serving in the military, just trying to keep the home where you raised your hero. Without warning, your landlord decides to evict you, claiming he has better plans for the property. You refuse to leave, standing your ground as any mother would. But then something extraordinary happens. Within 48 hours, a convoy of military vehicles rolls down your street, blocking all access to your home. The landlord is stunned. The neighbors are speechless. And you? You're about to discover that your fallen son's sacrifice has forged bonds, stronger than any eviction notice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It all began on a crisp October morning, when Sarah Bennett was sorting through her son's medals in the living room of her modest two-bedroom home on Cypress Lane. The medals were carefully arranged on a handcrafted display board, a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and several commendation medals that told the story of Marine Staff Sergeant Michael Bennett's courage and sacrifice. The morning light caught the polished surfaces, sending glimmers across the walls that Sarah sometimes liked to think were Michael's way of saying hello. Sarah had lived in this house for 23 years. It was where she had raised Michael. As a single mother, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, the walls held memories of his first steps, his high school graduation, and the proud day he enlisted. It was also where she had received the news 3 years ago that Michael had been killed by an IED while saving 3 members of his unit in Afghanistan. A Gold Star flag hung in her front window, the symbol no mother ever wants to display, but one Sarah bore with quiet dignity. The flag was the first thing she saw each morning when she stepped outside to collect the newspaper, a daily reminder of both her loss and her pride. The knock on her door that morning was firm, almost impatient. Sarah wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors had become rare since Michael's passing. Most of the neighborhood had changed over the years, younger families moving in, older residents passing on or relocating to retirement communities. Sarah knew few of her neighbors now, but she had always felt Michael's presence kept her company. When she opened the door, she was met by a man in an expensive suit, his luxury car idling in her driveway. His name was Richard Hargrove, though Sarah only knew him as the signature on the rent increase notices she'd received over the past year. "Mrs. Bennett," he said with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I hope I'm not interrupting your morning. I'm Richard Hargrove, your landlord." Sarah nodded, her hand still on the door. "I know who you are, Mr. Hargrove. Is there a problem with my rent? I sent the check last week." Richard's smile tightened. No problem with the payment. "May I come in? I have something important to discuss with you." Sarah hesitated but stepped aside. In all her years renting this house, the landlord had never once visited in person. The property had changed hands several times, most recently to Hargrove Properties, a development company that had been buying up much of the neighborhood. Richard stepped inside, his eyes scanning the modest living room with a calculating gaze that made Sarah uncomfortable. His attention lingered on Michael's medals and the photographs of her son in uniform that adorned the walls. "Mrs. Bennett, I'll get straight to the point," Richard said, turning to face her. "Hargrove Properties has new development plans for this area. We're upgrading the neighborhood, bringing in high-end condominiums that will revitalize the community." Sarah listened, a sense of foreboding growing with each word. "What does that have to do with my home?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Richard cleared his throat. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to terminate your lease. We'll be demolishing this and the surrounding properties next month to make way for the new development." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Terminate my lease? But I've lived here for over 20 years. This is my home." "I understand." "This is difficult," Richard said, though his tone suggested he understood nothing of the sort. "But business is business. Your month-to-month lease allows for termination with 30 days' notice. I'm providing you with 60 as a courtesy." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an official-looking document, holding it out to Sarah. "This is the formal notice. You'll need to vacate the premises by December 1st. Sarah didn't take the paper. Her eyes were fixed on the medals on the wall, on Michael's smiling face in his dress blues. "I can't leave, Mr. Hargrove. This is where I raised my son. This is where his memory lives." Richard's expression hardened. "Mrs. Bennett, I sympathize with your situation, but sentiment doesn't change the terms of your lease. The decision has been made." "There must be something we can do," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the panic rising within her. "I can pay more rent. I can—" "It's not about the rent," Richard interrupted. "It's about progress. The neighborhood is changing, and this property is simply more valuable as part of our new development." Sarah felt anger rising to replace her shock. "My son gave his life for this country, Mr. Hargrove. The least this country can do is allow his mother to keep the home where he grew up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Richard placed the eviction notice on the coffee table, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Your son's service, while admirable, has no bearing on our business decisions. I'm sorry, but you have 60 days to find new accommodations." As he turned to leave, Sarah's voice stopped him at the door. "I won't go," she said simply. "This is my home." Richard turned back, his expression cold. "Then I'll be forced to involve the authorities. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Mrs. Bennett." After he left, Sarah sat on the couch, the eviction notice untouched on the table before her. Her eyes moved across the room, taking in the photographs, the medals, the memories that filled every corner. This wasn't just a house. It was a shrine to her son, a place where she could feel close to him. She picked up a framed photograph of Michael in his dress uniform, his eyes bright with purpose and pride. "What would you do, Michael?" she whispered, to the image of her son. Sarah knew exactly what Michael would do. He would stand his ground. He would fight. Over the next week, Sarah sought help wherever she could find it. She visited legal aid offices, called tenant rights organizations, and reached out to local veterans groups. The responses were sympathetic, but not encouraging. Her month-to-month lease gave her little legal protection, and Hargrove Properties had significant influence in the local real estate market. "It's not right," said Thomas Reeves, an elderly Vietnam veteran who ran the local VFW post. "But these developers have deep pockets and deeper connections. They've been pushing people out all over town." "There has to be something we can do," Sarah insisted. "I'm not asking for charity. I just want to keep my home." Thomas looked thoughtful. "Let me make some calls. I can't promise anything, but there are people who might be willing to listen to your story." Meanwhile, Richard Hargrove wasn't waiting. 2 weeks after delivering the eviction notice, he sent a representative from his company to check on Sarah's progress in vacating the house. "Mr. Hargrove wants to make sure you understand the seriousness of the situation," the young woman said, her corporate smile firmly in place. "We can provide resources to help you find a new place to live." "I've made my position clear," Sarah replied. "I'm not leaving." The representative's smile faltered. "Mrs. Bennett, please be reasonable. Mr. Hargrove has been generous with the timeline, but he will pursue legal eviction if necessary." After the representative left, Sarah received a call from Thomas at the VFW. "Sarah, I've been talking to some people. There's a reporter at the local paper who might be interested in your story. And I've reached out to some of Michael's former unit members. They want to help." For the first time since receiving the eviction notice, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Thomas. I'm not giving up." The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Chen, arrived the next day. She listened intently as Sarah shared her story, taking photographs of the house, the Gold Star flag, and Michael's medals. "This is exactly the kind of story people need to hear," Jessica said. "A Gold Star mother being forced out of her home by a developer. I'll have this in tomorrow's paper and online tonight." True to her word, Jessica's article appeared the following morning. "Gold Star mother faces eviction from family home." The story was powerful, detailing Michael's service, his sacrifice, and Sarah's determination to remain in the home where his memory lived on. By noon, Sarah's phone was ringing constantly. Local TV stations wanted interviews. Veterans organizations from across the state were reaching out with offers of support. People she had never met were stopping by with flowers, food, and words of encouragement. Richard Hargrove's response was swift and cold. By the afternoon, Sarah received a hand-delivered letter from Hargrove Properties' attorney, claiming the media attention constituted harassment and reiterating the eviction timeline. Now, with a threat of immediate legal action. "He's trying to intimidate you," Jessica said when Sarah called her about the letter. "He doesn't like that people are paying attention. Stay strong, Sarah. Public opinion is on your side." That evening, as Sarah sat on her front porch watching the sunset, something she and Michael used to do together whenever he was home on leave, a car pulled up in front of her house. A man in his early 30s stepped out, his bearing immediately recognizable to Sarah as military, even in civilian clothes. "Mrs. Bennett," he called as he approached. "I'm Captain James Wilson. I served with your son in Afghanistan." Sarah stood, emotion welling up inside her. "You knew Michael?" Captain Wilson nodded, his expression solemn. "He saved my life, ma'am. I was one of the 3 he pulled to safety before the secondary explosion that took him. I would have been here for the funeral, but I was still in the hospital." Sarah invited him inside, and for the next 2 hours, James shared stories of Michael that she had never heard, moments of courage, kindness, and humor that painted a fuller picture of her son's life away from home. He showed her photographs on his phone of Michael with their unit, always smiling, always in the center of the group. "Everyone looked up to him," James said. "He was the best of us." As he was leaving, James paused at the door. "I read about what's happening with your landlord, Mrs. Bennett. Michael wouldn't stand for it, and neither will we. His brothers and sisters in arms haven't forgotten what he did, and we won't forget you either." Sarah was touched by his words, but unsure what they meant in practical terms. Her legal position remained precarious, and Richard Hargrove seemed determined to proceed with the eviction. The next morning brought more media attention. A local TV station set up in front of her house, interviewing Sarah and neighbors who had known Michael growing up. Social media was flooded with support for her cause, with the hashtag #JustStandWithSarah trending locally. Richard Hargrove was not pleased. He arrived at Sarah's door unannounced, his luxury car screeching to a halt in her driveway. "This has gone far enough," he said when Sarah answered the door. "You're turning a simple business matter into a media circus." Sarah stood her ground. "This isn't a simple business matter to me, Mr. Hargrove. This is my home, my son's home. Your emotional attachment doesn't change the legal reality," Richard snapped. "I've been patient, but that patience is at an end. I'm filing for formal eviction tomorrow. You'll be out of this house within a week." As he turned to leave, a group of veterans who had been speaking with the TV crew approached. One of them, a tall man with a prosthetic leg, stepped directly into Richard's path. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" he asked Sarah, his eyes never leaving Richard's face. "Mr. Hargrove was just leaving," Sarah replied, "after informing me that he's filing for eviction tomorrow. The veteran's expression hardened. Is that right? You're evicting a Gold Star mother from her home. Richard straightened his tie, visibly uncomfortable with the confrontation. This is a private business matter between Mrs. Bennett and Hargrove. Properties, it doesn't concern you. When you target the mother of a fallen brother, it concerns all of us, the veteran said quietly. The other veterans had formed a semicircle behind him, their message clear without a word being spoken. Richard pushed past them and hurried to his car. As he drove away, the veteran turned to Sarah. We've got your back, Mrs. Bennett. You're not alone in this fight. That evening, Sarah received a call from an unfamiliar number. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Colonel Lisa Martinez. Mrs. Bennett, I was Michael's commanding officer. I've been briefed on your situation, and I want you to know that we're working on it. Michael was one of our finest, and we take care of our own. I appreciate that, Colonel, Sarah said, but I'm not sure what can be done. Mr. Hargrove is filing for eviction tomorrow. Let him file, Colonel Martinez replied. Just stay where you are. You might see some activity in your neighborhood soon. Don't be alarmed. It's just Michael's family coming to pay their respects. Sarah didn't fully understand what the colonel meant, but her words brought comfort nonetheless. That night, Sarah slept better than she had since receiving the eviction. Notice her son's medals catching the moonlight from where they hung on the wall. The next morning, Sarah was awakened by the sound of engines, not the usual cars and occasional delivery trucks, but the distinctive rumble of heavy vehicles. She quickly dressed and went to her front door. What she saw took her breath away. A convoy of military vehicles had entered her street from both ends, effectively blocking all access. Humvees, transport trucks, and even a few armored vehicles were parked in strategic positions. Men and women in uniform were setting up what appeared to be a command post directly across from her house. As Sarah stood on her porch, stunned, Captain James Wilson approached, now in his full dress uniform. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennett," he said with a salute. "Special Operation Honor Guard, reporting for duty." "James, what is all this?" Sarah asked, gesturing at the military presence that had transformed her quiet street. "This, ma'am, is Michael's family, showing up when it matters," James replied. "Colonel Martinez authorized a special honor guard detail for Staff Sergeant Bennett's home. We'll be conducting a ceremonial watch here for the next few days." Sarah was speechless. As she looked around, she recognized some faces from Michael's funeral. Men and women who had served alongside her son, now standing at attention on her street. "Is this legal?" she finally managed to ask. James smiled. "Absolutely. We have all the proper authorizations for a memorial detail. The fact that it happens to block certain individuals from accessing your property is purely coincidental." As they spoke, a black luxury car, Richard Hargrove's, appeared at the end of the street. It stopped abruptly when the driver saw the military blockade. After a moment of hesitation, Richard emerged from the vehicle, his face flushed with anger. He approached one of the checkpoints, where two Marines stood at attention. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "I need to access my property." "I'm sorry, sir," one of the Marines replied calmly. "This area is currently secured for a military memorial operation. No civilian access at this time." "This is outrageous," Richard spluttered. "I have business to conduct. I'm filing an eviction today." "You're welcome to try again tomorrow, sir," the Marine said, unmoved. "The operation is scheduled to continue for at least 48 hours. Richard stormed back to his car, pulling out his phone as he went. Sarah could imagine the frantic calls he was about to make to his attorneys, to city officials, perhaps even to military contacts if he had any. James watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. He'll find that his usual influence doesn't extend very far when it comes to matters of military honor, Mrs. Bennett. We operate under a different authority. By mid-morning, the street had transformed. What had begun as a military operation now felt like a community gathering. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance were emerging from their homes, curious about the military presence. Many brought coffee and pastries for the service members, asking questions and expressing their support for Sarah. Colonel Martinez arrived shortly before noon, her uniform crisp and authoritative. She greeted Sarah with a warm handshake that turned into a brief embrace. "Staff Sergeant Bennett was one of my finest," she said, her voice steady but touched with emotion. "When Captain Wilson told me what was happening here, I knew we had to respond." "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah replied, overwhelmed by the show of support. "I never expected anything like this." The colonel's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Bennett, your son gave everything for his country and his comrades. The least we can do is ensure his mother isn't displaced from the home where he was raised." She gestured to the military vehicles lining the street. "This is just the beginning. We take care of our own." Throughout the day, more people arrived. Veterans from various service branches, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes with their service indicated only by a hat or pin. They formed a constant, rotating honor guard in front of Sarah's house, standing at attention in 2-hour shifts. Local news crews returned, capturing footage of the military presence and interviewing Colonel Martinez, who spoke eloquently about Michael's service and sacrifice. "Staff Sergeant Bennett embodied the highest values of the Marine Corps," she told the cameras. "His mother deserves to remain in the home where she raised such an exceptional young man." The reporter turned to the matter at hand. "Colonel," some might question whether this display of military presence is appropriate for what is essentially a civil dispute between a landlord and tenant. Colonel Martinez's response was measured but firm. "This is not merely a civil dispute. This is about honoring the sacrifice of a fallen Marine and supporting his family. The memorial detail is fully authorized and will continue as planned." By mid-afternoon, the story had gone national. Social media was flooded with images of the military vehicles blocking Sarah's street, alongside photographs of Michael in uniform and the Gold Star flag in her window. The hashtags "Stand with Sarah" and "Protect Gold Star Families" were trending across platforms. Richard Hargrove, meanwhile, was discovering the limits of his influence. His calls to city officials had been politely rebuffed. The military operation had all the necessary permits and authorizations. There was nothing the local government could do to intervene. His attorney was similarly helpless. "Mr. Hargrove, I understand your frustration," the lawyer said during their third call of the day. "But we're talking about a Gold Star mother and a military honor guard. If we push against this, the public relations damage would be catastrophic." Richard paced his office, watching the news coverage on a large wall-mounted screen. His development plans were time-sensitive. Investors were expecting progress. The longer the situation dragged on, the more money he stood to lose. "Find me another angle," he snapped at his attorney. "There has to be something we can use to shut this down." Back on Cypress Lane, Sarah was sitting on her front porch with Captain Wilson and a group of veterans who had served with Michael. They were sharing stories, building a more complete picture of her son's life in service. "He never told me about half of these things," Sarah said, wiping away tears as she laughed at a story about Michael organizing a makeshift Thanksgiving dinner in the desert. "He didn't want me to worry, I suppose." "That was Michael," one of the veterans, a woman named Rodriguez, replied. "Always thinking of others first. Even in the worst situations, he found ways to lift our spirits." As they talked, Sarah noticed a car pulling up at the military checkpoint. It wasn't Richard's luxury sedan, but a more modest vehicle. After a brief conversation with the Marines at the barricade, the car was allowed through. "Who's that?" Sarah asked, curious about the exception being made. James followed her gaze. That would be Senator Howard. He served in the Marines before going into politics. He reached out to Colonel Martinez this morning after seeing the news. The car stopped in front of Sarah's house, and a distinguished man in his 60s emerged. He approached the porch with a respectful nod to the veterans gathered there. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Senator Robert Howard. I wanted to come personally to express my support." Sarah stood to greet him, surprised by the visit. "Thank you, Senator. It's been an overwhelming day." Senator Howard's expression was solemn. "I reviewed your son's service record this morning. He was an extraordinary young man. His actions in Afghanistan saved many lives, including some of the people here today." He gestured to the veterans on the porch. "The country owes him, and you, a debt that can never be fully repaid." The senator stayed for nearly an hour, listening as Sarah and the veterans shared stories about Michael. Before leaving, he took Sarah aside. "Mrs. Bennett, I want you to know that I'm introducing emergency legislation next week to provide additional housing protections for Gold Star families. It won't solve your immediate situation, but perhaps it will prevent others from facing similar challenges in the future." "That would be a fitting tribute to Michael," Sarah replied, touched by the gesture. "He always wanted to make things better for others." As the senator departed, Sarah noticed a flurry of activity at one of the checkpoints. Richard Hargrove had returned, this time accompanied by a police officer. They appeared to be in a heated discussion with the Marines guarding the entrance to the street. Colonel Martinez, who had been coordinating with her team nearby, immediately moved to intercept them. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Richard gesturing angrily, while the officer looked increasingly uncomfortable. After several minutes, Richard and the police officer retreated. Colonel Martinez returned to where Sarah was watching from the porch. Mr. Hargrove brought a police escort, hoping to force access to the street, the colonel explained. The officer was not pleased to discover he'd been misled about the nature of the situation. Mr. Hargrove apparently neglected to mention that his urgent business involved evicting a Gold Star mother. "Will there be trouble?" Sarah asked, worried about potential legal complications. Colonel Martinez shook her head. "The officer actually apologized to us before leaving, said his brother served in the army. He understands what we're doing here." As evening approached, the street took on a different atmosphere. Floodlights were set up, illuminating the area with a soft glow. More neighbors had joined the gathering, bringing folding chairs and food to share. What had begun as a military operation had evolved into something like a community vigil. A young lieutenant approached Sarah with a satellite phone. "Mrs. Bennett, there's a call for you. It's from Afghanistan." Surprised, Sarah took the phone. "Hello?" "Mrs. Bennett," came a voice, distorted slightly by the connection but clear enough to understand. "This is Captain Ramirez. I'm currently deployed with the unit your son saved 3 years ago. We heard about what's happening back home and we wanted you to know that we're with you in spirit." Sarah's voice caught in her throat. "Thank you, Captain. That means more than I can say. Your son is a legend here, ma'am. The new Marines, they all learn about what he did. His sacrifice wasn't forgotten, and neither will you be." After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly on the porch, watching as the honor guard changed shifts in front of her house. The show of support was overwhelming, not just from the military personnel who had known Michael, but from strangers who recognized the significance of what was happening on Cypress Lane. As night fell, most of the neighbors returned to their homes, but the military presence remained. Shifts were organized, ensuring that the honor guard would continue through the night. Portable heaters were set up to ward off the evening chill, and the command post across from Sarah's house was fully operational with communications equipment and supplies. Sarah couldn't sleep. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind, the shock of seeing military vehicles on her quiet street, the confrontation with Richard, the visit from Senator Howard. It felt like the world had suddenly expanded around. Her, revealing connections and support she hadn't known existed. Around midnight, she made a pot of coffee and brought it out to the service members on duty. As she stepped onto her porch, she was surprised to see James sitting on the steps, seemingly lost in thought. "You should be resting," he said, standing as she approached with the coffee pot and mugs. "I could say the same to you," Sarah replied. "You've been here all day." James accepted a cup with a grateful nod. "Some nights are harder than others. The anniversary of the day we lost Michael is coming up next week. It's always difficult around that time." Sarah hadn't realized that others marked that date as she did, not just as a personal loss, but as a shared memory. "You all remember the exact day?" "Every one of us," James confirmed. "How could we forget? It was the day everything changed." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, sipping coffee and watching the quiet street with its unusual military presence. Finally, Sarah spoke. "James, what happens after this? The honor guard can't stay forever. Eventually, Richard will find a way to proceed with the eviction." James set his mug down, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Bennett, do you know why military operations succeed?" Sarah shook her head, uncertain where he was going with the question. "It's not just about firepower or tactics. It's about creating momentum and changing the battlefield. Right now, we're doing exactly that." He gestured to the street, the vehicles, the command post. "This isn't just about blocking access for a few days. It's about changing the story, shifting public perception, and creating pressure that can't be ignored. But legally speaking, you're still facing eviction," James acknowledged. "But this was never going to be won in court. It's going to be won in the court of public opinion, in boardrooms where investors are getting nervous about bad publicity, and in the minds of people who are watching this unfold and asking themselves what kind of country allows a Gold Star mother to be evicted from her home." The strategy was becoming clearer to Sarah. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a calculated operation with specific objectives. "Colonel Martinez has been in contact with several veterans advocacy groups," James continued. "They're preparing legal challenges, exploring emergency housing protections, and reaching out to potential donors who might be willing to purchase the property. Senator Howard's legislation is part of a broader effort to create political pressure." "You've thought of everything," Sarah said, impressed by the comprehensive approach. James smiled. "That's what Michael would have done. He never went into a situation without multiple contingency plans." Around 2 a.m., Sarah finally returned inside, leaving James to his watch. The house felt different somehow, not just a repository of memories, but a place of active purpose. Michael's presence seemed stronger than ever, as though his spirit had returned with his comrades to defend the home he had loved. She slept fitfully, waking early as sunlight filtered through her bedroom window. The sounds outside were different from her usual morning routine. The low hum of military vehicles, radio communications, the crisp footsteps of the honor guard changing shifts. When she stepped outside with her morning coffee, she was greeted by a sight that took her breath away. Overnight, hundreds of small American flags had been planted in her front yard, creating a sea of red, white, and blue. In the center was a larger Gold Star flag, standing tall and proud. Colonel Martinez approached, saluting Sarah with formal respect. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. I hope you don't mind the addition to your landscaping. It was Captain Wilson's idea." "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, overwhelmed by the display. The colonel's expression was determined. "Day 2 of Operation Home Honor is underway. We've received reinforcements overnight. Veterans from 3 states have arrived to join the detail. And there's something else you should see." She led Sarah to the command post, where a laptop was open to a fundraising page. The title read, "Secure Staff Sergeant Bennett's Home," with a photo of Michael in uniform. The goal was set at $350,000, enough to purchase the house outright from Hargrove Properties. The current total showed over $175,000 in donations, with new contributions coming in every few minutes. This was launched last night by the Veterans Alliance, Colonel Martinez explained. It's been shared over 50,000 times already. Sarah stared at the screen in disbelief. People are donating to buy my house? People are donating to honor your son's sacrifice and ensure his mother isn't displaced, the colonel corrected gently. This isn't charity, Mrs. Bennett. This is recognition of a debt owed. The fundraising page included testimonials from veterans who had served with Michael, excerpts from Senator Howard's statement, and a detailed account of the situation with Hargrove Properties. The comments section was filled with messages of support, many from military families who understood the significance of a home where memories of a fallen loved one lived on. As Sarah was reading through the comments, her phone rang. It was Jessica Chen, the reporter who had broken the story originally. Mrs. Bennett, I'm outside the checkpoint. They won't let me through without your approval. But I have some news. You might want to hear in person. Sarah arranged for Jessica to be escorted to her house. The reporter arrived a few minutes later, notepad in hand and excitement evident in her expression. Hargrove Properties is facing a shareholder revolt, Jessica said without preamble. I have sources inside the company. The negative publicity is causing major investors to question Richard's leadership. Their stock dropped 8% yesterday, and it's continuing to fall this morning. Because of me? Sarah asked, finding it hard to believe that her situation could affect a large development company so significantly. Because you've become a symbol, Jessica explained. This isn't just about one eviction anymore. It's about how we treat Gold Star families, how we honor sacrifice, and whether corporate interests can override fundamental human decency. The story has struck a chord nationally. Throughout the morning, more evidence of this national impact emerged. Local businesses began arriving with donations, food for the service members, supplies for the command post, offers of support for Sarah. A prominent law firm contacted Colonel Martinez, volunteering their services pro bono to fight the eviction. Veterans motorcycle clubs from surrounding states roared into the neighborhood, forming an additional layer of support beyond the military checkpoints. Richard Hargrove, meanwhile, was facing a crisis. His office had been flooded with calls and emails, many from investors demanding action to resolve the situation. The development project's timeline was in jeopardy, and the negative publicity was affecting other Hargrove Properties ventures. Shortly before noon, his car once again appeared at the checkpoint. This time he was alone, and his demeanor was notably different, less confrontational, more resigned. The Marines at the checkpoint maintained their position. I'm sorry, sir. The area remains secured for the memorial operation. I understand, Richard replied, his tone subdued, but I need to speak with Mrs. Bennett. It's important. The guard made a call to the command post, and after a brief consultation with Sarah, Richard was allowed to proceed on foot, escorted by 2 Marines. The walk down the flag-lined street, past the honor guard and the gathered veterans, was clearly uncomfortable for him. By the time he reached Sarah's porch, where she waited with Colonel Martinez and Captain Wilson, his usual confident demeanor had completely evaporated. Mrs. Bennett, he began, clearing his throat nervously, I'd like to discuss a potential resolution to our situation. I'm listening, Sarah replied, her voice steady. The events of the past 2 days had transformed her. Where once she had felt powerless against Hargrove Properties, she now stood with the full weight of a community behind her. Richard glanced uncomfortably at the military officers flanking Sarah. Perhaps we could speak privately. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of Michael's family, Sarah responded, gesturing to the service members. Richard nodded reluctantly. Very well. The Board of Hargrove Properties has authorized me to offer you a lifetime lease at your current rental rate. You would be able to remain in the home for as long as you wish, with no further threat of eviction. The offer hung in the air. It was a significant concession, one that would solve Sarah's immediate problem. But Colonel Martinez's expression remained skeptical. And the surrounding properties, she asked. The development would continue around Mrs. Bennett. Richard shifted uneasily. The project would be modified to accommodate this property. Yes, construction would proceed on the adjacent lots. Sarah considered the offer. It would mean keeping her home, but living in the middle of a construction zone, eventually surrounded by high-end condominiums that would transform the character of the neighborhood where Michael had grown up. That's not acceptable, she said finally. This isn't just about me having a place to live. It's about preserving the home my son knew, the neighborhood he loved. I can't watch it be dismantled around me. Richard's expression tightened. Mrs. Bennett, this is a very generous offer under the circumstances. I don't think you understand the value of what's being presented. I understand perfectly, Sarah replied. You're offering to preserve the house, but destroy everything around it that makes it a home. That's not a solution I can accept. For a moment, Richard looked like he might argue further, but the steady gazes of Colonel Martinez and Captain Wilson deterred him. I'll relay your response to the board, he said stiffly, but I should warn you that our patience isn't unlimited. This display can't continue indefinitely. As Richard was escorted back to the checkpoint, Sarah remained on the porch, watching his retreating figure. The past days had been a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. She had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, and support she never realized was available to her. But Richard's warning lingered in her mind. How long could this extraordinary situation continue? He's right about one thing, Colonel Martinez said, reading Sarah's thoughts. The memorial detail has a limited authorization. We can maintain this presence for another 3 days at most. Sarah nodded, understanding the reality of their situation. Then what happens? Then we move to the next phase, James replied with quiet confidence. This was never meant to be a permanent solution. Mrs. Bennett, it's a catalyst for change. That afternoon, Sarah received a call from a name she recognized but had never spoken to directly. Congressman David Matthews, chair of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. His voice was warm but businesslike. Mrs. Bennett, I've been following your situation closely. I'd like to visit tomorrow if that's possible. There are some options we should discuss. Of course, Congressman, Sarah replied, still adjusting to the idea that her personal struggle had captured the attention of national political figures. The Marines at the checkpoint will be expecting you. After the call, Sarah sought out Colonel Martinez to inform her about the congressman's impending visit. The colonel was in the middle of a briefing with several junior officers, but she stepped aside to speak with Sarah. Congressman Matthews is a good ally to have, she said, nodding approvingly. He's a veteran himself, Army, I believe, and he's been a strong advocate for Gold Star families in Congress. What do you think he wants to discuss? Sarah asked. I can't say for certain, but I know his committee has been working on legislation related to housing security for military families. Your case might have accelerated some of those efforts. The day continued with a steady stream of visitors and supporters. Local school children arrived with handmade cards thanking Michael for his service and expressing support for his mother. An elderly veteran who had served in Korea presented Sarah with a quilt made by his community's sewing circle, each square bearing the name of a local fallen soldier. By late afternoon, Jessica Chen returned with an update on the fundraising campaign. You're not going to believe this, she said, showing Sarah her tablet. The total just passed $275,000. At this rate, you'll reach the goal before the end of tomorrow." Sarah scrolled through the list of donors, overwhelmed by the generosity. Some had contributed thousands of dollars, while others had given just 5 or 10, whatever they could afford. Many included personal messages about their own military, connections or expressions of gratitude for Michael's service. "I never imagined anything like this," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "These people don't even know me." "They know what you represent," Jessica replied, "and they know what your son gave for this country." That evening, as Sarah was helping distribute meals to the service members on duty, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the checkpoint. Unlike Richard Hargrove's previous visits, this vehicle was immediately waved through. It stopped in front of Sarah's house, and a woman in an expensive business suit emerged, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Bennett," she called, "I'm Victoria Reynolds, Senior Legal Counsel for Hargrove Properties. I was hoping we could speak briefly." Sarah approached cautiously, aware that Colonel Martinez and James had moved to positions nearby, watching the interaction carefully. "Ms. Reynolds," Sarah acknowledged, "I thought Mr. Hargrove was handling this matter personally." "The board felt a fresh perspective might be beneficial," Victoria replied, her tone professional but not unfriendly. "May we sit somewhere and talk?" They settled on the front porch, where the evening light cast long shadows across the flag-filled yard. Victoria opened her portfolio and removed several documents. "Mrs. Bennett, I'll be direct. The situation has escalated beyond what anyone at Hargrove Properties anticipated. The board is concerned about the long-term impact on the company's reputation and financial stability." "I'm sorry to hear that," Sarah replied, keeping her expression neutral, "but I'm concerned about my home." Victoria nodded. "That's precisely why I'm here. The board has authorized me to present you with a new proposal. Rather than offering you a lifetime lease, Hargrove Properties is prepared to sell you the house at a significant discount from market value." She slid a document across the small table between them. Sarah glanced at the figure. $175,000. Less than half what similar properties in the area had sold for recently. "The company would also contribute $50,000 toward necessary renovations and maintenance," Victoria continued. "You would own the home outright, Mrs. Bennett. No more landlord, no more rent increases." Sarah studied the offer, aware of its significance. This wasn't just a concession, it was capitulation. Hargrove Properties was effectively abandoning its position, offering her exactly what she wanted, permanent security in her home. "And the surrounding properties?" Sarah asked, recalling Richard's earlier proposal. "What happens to the neighborhood?" Victoria hesitated. "The development would proceed on the lots Hargrove already owns. However, we would modify the plans to ensure minimal disruption to your property. Construction hours would be limited, and we would implement additional measures to reduce noise and dust." Sarah considered the offer. It was substantially better than Richard's proposal, but it still meant the eventual transformation of the neighborhood Michael had known. The modest family homes would be replaced by luxury condominiums, changing the character of the community forever. "I appreciate the offer, Ms. Reynolds," Sarah said carefully, "but I need time to consider it. This isn't just about me or even just about my home. It's about what's right for this community." Victoria nodded, her expression understanding. "Of course, the offer will remain open until noon tomorrow. After that, I'm afraid the board will need to pursue other options." After Victoria left, Sarah sought out James and Colonel Martinez to discuss the proposal. They gathered in her living room, surrounded by Michael's photographs and medals. "It's a good offer," James acknowledged. "Better than I expected, honestly. They're clearly feeling the pressure." Colonel Martinez nodded in agreement. From a practical standpoint, it would secure your position here permanently. No more rent, no more landlord issues. But the neighborhood would still be transformed, Sarah said, voicing her primary concern. Everything around this house would change. Change is inevitable, Mrs. Bennett, the Colonel replied gently. Even without Hargrove Properties, this neighborhood will evolve over time. The question is whether you can influence the nature of that change. Sarah's gaze fell on a photograph of Michael in his high school baseball uniform, standing on the field that was now slated for development. This isn't just about me anymore, she said slowly. It's about all the families like mine, all the veterans who need stable housing, all the communities being disrupted by developers who only see profit margins. James leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. What are you thinking? Sarah didn't answer immediately. An idea was forming in her mind. Ambitious, perhaps unrealistic, but worth exploring. I need to make some calls, she said finally. And I think I need to speak with Congressman Matthews when he arrives tomorrow. The night passed quietly. The military presence continued its rotation, maintaining the honor guard and checkpoints. Sarah slept better than she had in days, a plan taking shape in her dreams and waking thoughts. Morning brought a renewed sense of purpose. As Sarah prepared coffee for the service members on duty, her phone rang. It was Jessica Chen again. Mrs. Bennett, the fundraising campaign just hit $350,000. You've reached the goal, Sarah smiled, the timing feeling like confirmation of her evolving plan. That's wonderful news, Jessica, but I'm going to need your help with something else today. Anything, the reporter replied instantly. What do you need? I need you to arrange a community meeting, here on my street. The day of the community meeting arrived with a sense of electricity in the air. Sarah spent the morning preparing her home and herself, sorting through Michael's medals one more time, as if drawing strength from them. Today would determine not just her future, but potentially the futures of countless veterans and Gold Star families like hers. Jessica Chen had worked miracles. By 4 o'clock, the street was transformed. A small stage had been erected near Sarah's front yard, complete with a podium and sound system. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the blocked-off street, with space left for the honor guard to maintain their posts. Local businesses had provided refreshments, and a large banner reading, "Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust," hung between two trees. People began arriving early, neighbors, veterans, local officials, and curious citizens drawn by the media coverage. News vans lined the perimeter of the military checkpoints, their satellite dishes extending skyward. What had begun as a local human interest story had blossomed into national news. Congressman Matthews arrived promptly at 3:30, accompanied by 2 aides and a military liaison. He greeted Sarah warmly, taking a moment to study the photographs of Michael displayed in the living room. "Your son was a credit to the uniform," he said, his voice sincere. "The plan you've proposed would be a fitting tribute to his service." Sarah nodded gratefully. "Have you heard anything from your contacts about the feasibility of federal support?" "Better than that," the congressman replied with a smile. "I've brought someone with me who can speak to it directly." He gestured toward a woman in her 50s who had accompanied him, Dr. Eleanor Wright, Director of Veterans Housing Initiatives at the Department of Veterans Affairs. "Mrs. Bennett," Dr. Wright said, extending her hand, "your proposal has generated significant interest within the VA. We've been looking for innovative, community-based models for veterans housing. What you're suggesting aligns perfectly with our strategic priorities." Sarah's hope surged. "Does that mean the VA might be able to help?" "It means," Dr. Wright said with a warm smile, "that I've come prepared to discuss a matching grant program that could potentially double whatever funds your trust raises. We have contingency funding specifically for pilot programs that demonstrate community partnership and sustainable impact. The news was better than Sarah had dared hope. With the fundraising campaign already at its goal and the possibility of matching federal funds, the Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust could become a reality far sooner than she had imagined. As they continued discussing details, Sarah noticed increased activity at the checkpoint. A small convoy of vehicles was arriving, sleek corporate cars with the Hargrove Properties logo on their doors. Richard Hargrove emerged from the lead, a vehicle accompanied by Victoria Reynolds and several other executives in business attire. James approached Sarah, nodding toward the new arrivals. "Looks like they're taking this seriously. That's the entire executive team of Hargrove Properties." Good, Sarah replied with quiet determination. "They need to hear what we have to say." By 4 o'clock, every seat was filled, and people stood in rows behind the chairs. Colonel Martinez had arranged for the honor guard to form a ceremonial perimeter around the gathering, their presence a solemn reminder of the military service at the heart of the event. Sarah took her place at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. She had never been comfortable with public speaking, but today the words came easily, flowing from a place of conviction and purpose. 3 years ago, she began, my son, Staff Sergeant Michael Bennett, gave his life protecting his fellow Marines in Afghanistan. When I received the news, standing in the doorway of this house, I thought my world had ended. In many ways, it had. But what I've learned these past few days is that when one world ends, another can begin, if we have the courage to build it. She gestured to the military personnel, standing at attention. These men and women have shown me what it truly means to leave no one behind. They've reminded me that Michael's sacrifice created bonds that can never be broken, bonds that extend not just to those who served with him, but to all who understand the meaning of service and sacrifice. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. When I received an eviction notice from Hargrove Properties, I thought I was fighting alone. I was wrong. None of us fights alone. That's the lesson Michael lived by, and it's the truth I've rediscovered through this extraordinary journey. She outlined the events of the past days, the military blockade, the public support, the fundraising campaign that had reached its goal ahead of schedule. Then she turned to the heart of her proposal. Today, we stand at a crossroads. We can view this as a simple dispute between a landlord and tenant, or we can recognize it as an opportunity to create something meaningful and lasting. The Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust isn't just about saving one Gold Star mother's home. It's about creating a community where veterans, service members, and military families can find stability, support, and the honor they deserve. Sarah looked directly at Richard Hargrove and his executives seated in the front row. Mr. Hargrove, your company has offered to sell me this house at a reduced price. I'm grateful for that offer, but I believe we can do more together. I'm proposing that Hargrove Properties partner with us to create a model community. Sell not just my home, but all your properties in this neighborhood to the trust at the same discounted rate. Help us create affordable housing for those who have served our nation. Richard's expression remained carefully neutral, though several of his executives exchanged glances. Victoria Reynolds was taking notes, her face thoughtful. This isn't charity, Sarah continued, addressing the broader audience now. This is investment in the values we claim to hold dear. When we say we honor service and sacrifice, we must back those words with actions that make a tangible difference in people's lives. Congressman Matthews took the podium next, outlining the legislative initiatives his committee was developing to support veterans' housing security. Dr. Wright followed, explaining the VA's interest in community-based models and the potential for matching funds. As the presentations continued, Sarah watched Richard Hargrove's face. The developer seemed deep in thought, occasionally leaning over to whisper to Victoria or one of his other executives. Was he calculating financial implications, considering the public relations value, or perhaps Sarah dared to hope, reflecting on the human impact of the decision before him? After the formal presentations concluded, the gathering shifted to an open forum. Veterans shared stories of housing insecurity after service. Neighbors spoke about the importance of preserving community character and affordability. Local officials discussed the broader implications for the city's approach to development. Throughout it all, Richard Hargrove remained silent, listening, with an intensity that Sarah found encouraging. He wasn't dismissing the idea outright, which meant there was still hope. Finally, as the forum was drawing to a close, Richard approached the podium. The crowd fell silent, anticipation hanging in the air. "Mrs. Bennett," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "your proposal is unexpected. As a developer, my instinct is to focus on market rates, return on investment, and shareholder value. Those considerations don't disappear simply because we're moved by your story." Sarah's heart sank slightly, but Richard wasn't finished. "However," he continued, "business isn't conducted in a vacuum. Hargrove Properties exists within a community, and we have responsibilities beyond our balance sheet. The past days have made that abundantly clear." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I can't make commitments on behalf of our entire board without proper consultation. But speaking personally, I believe there's merit in exploring a partnership with the Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust. If we can structure an arrangement that acknowledges both our business needs and the community benefits, I'm prepared to advocate for it strongly with our board and investors." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. It wasn't a firm commitment, but it was far more positive than Sarah had dared to hope. Richard turned to face the audience directly. "Many of you have viewed Hargrove Properties as the villain in this story. Perhaps that perception was earned, but companies, like people, can learn and grow. If this situation has taught me anything, it's that there are values that transcend profit margins. The sacrifices made by Staff Sergeant Bennett and others like him demand recognition beyond words and symbols." As Richard returned to his seat, Victoria Reynolds approached Sarah with a business card. "We should talk details soon," she said, quietly. "I think we can make this work, but the structure will be important. Call me tomorrow." Sarah nodded, a sense of cautious optimism spreading through her. The seed she had planted was taking root. The dream of transforming her personal struggle into something that could benefit many was becoming tangible. The community meeting concluded with Colonel Martinez inviting everyone to observe a moment of silence for Michael and all fallen service members. As the crowd stood with heads bowed, Sarah felt her son's presence more strongly than ever. He had always believed in bringing people together, in finding solutions that benefited everyone. Today, his spirit had guided a diverse community toward a shared vision. After the gathering dispersed, a small group remained at Sarah's house. James, Colonel Martinez, Congressman Matthews, Dr. Wright, and several key veterans who had been instrumental in organizing the support effort. They gathered in Sarah's living room, surrounded by Michael's photographs and medals, to discuss next steps. Richard's response was encouraging, Congressman Matthews said, but we need to maintain momentum. These corporate reconsiderations can evaporate quickly if pressure eases. Colonel Martinez nodded in agreement. The memorial detail authorization ends tomorrow. We need to transition to a different form of visible support. The Veterans Alliance is organizing a round-the-clock volunteer presence, James added. Not a military operation, but veterans in rotation, maintaining a symbolic, watch It won't have the same impact as the military vehicles, but it will keep the message alive. Dr. Wright opened her laptop, pulling up a document. I've drafted a preliminary structure for the trust and the VA matching grant application. We'll need to move quickly to secure the funding before the end of the fiscal year. As they discussed logistics and strategy, Sarah felt a profound sense of transformation. Just days ago, she had been a solitary figure facing eviction, clinging to memories in a house she couldn't keep. Now she was at the center of a movement, surrounded by dedicated allies working toward a vision larger than any of them had initially imagined. There's one more thing we should consider, Sarah said during a lull in the conversation. If this works, if we succeed in creating the Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust, we should document everything. Create a blueprint that other communities can follow. This shouldn't be just one neighborhood in one city. It should be a model that can be replicated wherever veterans and military families need housing security. Congressman Matthews nodded, enthusiastically. Exactly what my committee has been looking for, grassroots initiatives that can scale nationally with the right support. If we can demonstrate success here, I can help secure funding for similar projects across the country. As the evening wore on, plans took shape, responsibilities were assigned, and a clear path forward emerged. By the time the group dispersed, the Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust had transformed from an idea into a structured initiative with defined roles, timelines, and objectives. Sarah stood on her porch, watching as the last visitors departed. The honor guard remained at their posts, their presence a constant reminder of the bonds that had brought this movement to life. James joined her, leaning against the porch railing. You've started something remarkable, Mrs. Bennett. Whatever happens with Hargrove Properties, you've changed the conversation about veterans housing and community development. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Sarah replied. Without all of you. Michael always said the strength of the Marines wasn't in weapons or tactics, but in the unbreakable bonds between people who would never leave each other behind. He was right, James said softly, and he'd be proud to see those bonds extending beyond those who served, building connections between military families, communities, developers, government agencies, all working toward a shared purpose. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. As promised, the military detail began transitioning responsibility to civilian veterans organizations. The heavy vehicles departed one by one, replaced by volunteers in veteran-owned cars and trucks. The command post equipment was relocated to a donated office space 3 blocks away, where the Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust would establish its temporary headquarters. Colonel Martinez conducted a formal handover ceremony, transferring operational leadership to a coalition of veterans groups. The honor guard remained in place, now staffed by volunteers in veterans organization uniforms rather than active duty personnel. The mission continues under new management, the colonel told Sarah during their farewell, but the objective remains the same, securing this home and creating a lasting legacy for your son and all who serve. As the military presence receded, Sarah worried briefly that media interest might fade as well, but Jessica Chen assured her this wouldn't be the case. This story has evolved beyond the dramatic visuals of military vehicles blocking a street, the reporter explained. Now it's about innovation, community action, and systemic change. That's a deeper and more enduring narrative. Jessica's assessment proved accurate. Throughout the day, interview requests continued to arrive from national outlets interested in the Veterans Housing Trust concept. Congressman Matthews conducted several remote television appearances from Sarah's living room, framing the initiative as a model for community-based solutions to veterans' housing challenges. By mid-afternoon, the call Sarah had been waiting for finally came. Victoria Reynolds's voice was crisp and professional, but Sarah detected an undercurrent of excitement. Mrs. Bennett, I've just come from a board meeting. After extensive discussion, Hargrove Properties has authorized me to present a formal counter-proposal to your trust initiative. Sarah's pulse quickened. I'm listening. The board is prepared to sell all our properties in the Cypress Lane neighborhood to the Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust at 60% of market value, a deeper discount than originally offered for your home alone. Additionally, we would like to discuss a potential partnership where Hargrove Properties provides property management services for the trust at reduced rates and contributes architectural and construction expertise for necessary renovations. The offer exceeded Sarah's expectations. She had anticipated resistance, haggling, perhaps even rejection. Instead, Hargrove Properties was not only accepting the core of her proposal, but enhancing it with additional support. That's extremely generous, Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. May I ask what prompted such a comprehensive offer? Victoria hesitated before answering. Off the record, several factors converged. The negative publicity was certainly significant, but there was more to it. Richard was genuinely moved by the community response and the veterans' stories. And then there's the practical reality. One of our major investors is a veteran himself. After seeing the coverage, he made it clear that his continued support depended on finding an honorable resolution. Sarah couldn't help but smile. The network of support extended further than she had realized, reaching even into the boardroom of Hargrove Properties. We would need to formalize everything, of course, Victoria continued. Establish the trust as a legal entity, secure the financing, draft purchase agreements for each property. But assuming we can align on details, Hargrove Properties is prepared to move forward with the partnership. After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, processing the implications. The home she had fought so hard to keep would remain hers. The neighborhood Michael had loved would be preserved in spirit, becoming a haven for veterans and military families. And most importantly, her son's sacrifice would create a legacy of security and community for those who followed in his footsteps. She called James first, then Congressman Matthews and Dr. Wright. Within an hour, the core team had reassembled in her living room, glasses of celebratory sparkling cider in hand. To the Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust, Congressman Matthews said, raising his glass, and to a mother who turned personal loss into community gain. To Michael, Sarah added softly, her eyes on her son's photograph, who taught us all what it means to serve something greater than ourselves. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Legal documents were drafted and signed. The trust was formally established as a non-profit organization with Sarah as its founding chairperson. The VA matching grant application was expedited through Dr. Wright's office, doubling the funds available for property acquisition and renovation. One by one, the properties in the Cypress Lane neighborhood were transferred to the trust. Some were already vacant, awaiting Hargrove's originally planned demolition. Others were occupied by renters who were offered the opportunity to remain under the trust's management, with veterans and military families given priority for any units that became available. 3 months after the initial eviction notice arrived, Sarah stood in the center of Cypress Park, where a small ceremony was taking place. A stone monument had been erected, bearing a bronze plaque with Michael's image and the words, "The Michael Bennett Veterans Community, No One Fights Alone." Established 2025. Surrounding the monument were the first residents of the newly established community, veterans and their families who had found homes in the properties acquired by the trust. Some were elderly veterans who had faced housing insecurity for years. Others were young families of active duty service members seeking stability during deployments. All had found not just housing but a supportive community built on shared understanding. and mutual respect. Richard Hargrove stood among the attendees, his usual corporate armor softened by the significance of the occasion. When invited to speak, he approached the podium with uncharacteristic humility. "When I first came to Cypress Lane with an eviction notice, I saw only property values and development potential," he admitted. "Mrs. Bennett and the extraordinary community that rallied around her taught me to see something far more valuable, the human bonds that transform houses into homes and neighbors into family." He gestured to the monument and the surrounding neighborhood. "Hargrove Properties is proud to be part of this initiative. It has changed not just this community, but our company's approach to development. We're already exploring similar partnerships in other cities, creating a new division focused specifically on veterans' housing solutions." After the ceremony, as people mingled and explored the community center being established in what had once been a vacant property, Sarah found herself back on her front porch. The gold star flag still hung in her window, but now it was joined by a small sign identifying her home as the founding location of the Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust. James joined her, as he had so many times over the past months. "I got the call today," he said. "The program is being expanded. 5 more cities have secured funding to replicate the model. Congressman Matthews says it's the fastest adoption of a community housing initiative he's ever seen." Sarah smiled, watching as children played on the street that had once been blocked by military vehicles. Michael would be amazed by all this. He always thought small actions could have big impacts, but even he couldn't have imagined this. "I don't know," James replied thoughtfully. He had a way of seeing possibilities others missed. That's what made him such an effective leader. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the afternoon sun warm on the porch. "You know," Sarah said finally, "when I received that eviction notice, I thought I was losing the last connection to my son. I couldn't have been more wrong. Fighting to keep this house led me to discover connections I never knew existed. To you, to Michael's unit, to veterans across the country, to a purpose that honors his memory in ways I never imagined possible." James nodded. "That's how Michael lived, finding connections, building bridges, creating something positive even in the darkest circumstances. You've carried his spirit forward in the most powerful way possible." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard where American flags had once stood in silent tribute, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. The house around her was still filled with Michael's photographs and medals, still echoed with memories of his childhood and youth, but now it was also filled with a new purpose, a living legacy that would continue long after she was gone. The eviction notice that had once threatened to take everything from her had instead become the catalyst for creating something enduring and meaningful. By standing her ground, Sarah had not only secured her own home, but had helped establish a foundation of security for countless others who had served their country. As darkness fell and lights came on in the homes throughout the Michael Bennett veterans community, Sarah thought about the extraordinary journey that had brought them all to this moment. From military blockade to community celebration, from personal crisis to collective purpose, from one mother's stand to a national movement. The landlord had evicted a Gold Star mother, and 48 hours later, when the military convoy blocked his street, none of them could have imagined where that confrontation would lead. Not to victory or defeat in a simple property dispute, but to transformation of a neighborhood, a company, a community, and countless lives touched by the ripples of one fallen Marine's lasting impact. In the quiet of her front porch, Sarah whispered words meant only for Michael's spirit. "You're still bringing people together, still leading the way, still showing us all what it means to serve something greater than ourselves. Your mission continues through all of us." and in homes throughout the community that now bore his name, veterans and their families found not just shelter, but belonging. Not just houses, but a home where no one would ever again have to fight alone. Thanks for watching. I hope this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of community and the enduring impact of service and sacrifice. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from, and have you witnessed similar acts of solidarity in your community? Your support means everything, and I'll be back soon with another remarkable story that shows how ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they stand together. The board is prepared to sell all our properties in the Cypress Lane neighborhood to the Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust at 60% of market value, a deeper discount than originally offered for your home alone. Additionally, we would like to discuss a potential partnership where Hargrove Properties provides property management services for the trust at reduced rates and contributes architectural and construction expertise for necessary renovations. The offer exceeded Sarah's expectations. She had anticipated resistance, haggling, perhaps even rejection. Instead, Hargrove Properties was not only accepting the core of her proposal, but enhancing it with additional support. That's extremely generous, Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. May I ask what prompted such a comprehensive offer? Victoria hesitated before answering. Off the record, several factors converged. The negative publicity was certainly significant, but there was more to it. Richard was genuinely moved by the community response and the veterans' stories. And then there's the practical reality. One of our major investors is a veteran himself. After seeing the coverage, he made it clear that his continued support depended on finding an honorable resolution. Sarah couldn't help but smile. The network of support extended further than she had realized, reaching even into the boardroom of Hargrove Properties. We would need to formalize everything, of course, Victoria continued. Establish the trust as a legal entity, secure the financing, draft purchase agreements for each property. But assuming we can align on details, Hargrove Properties is prepared to move forward with the partnership. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the newly renovated community center of what was now officially known as the Michael Bennett Veterans Village. What had once been a row of aging rental properties targeted for demolition was now a thriving community focused on supporting veterans and military families. The transformation had been remarkable, not just in the physical structures, but in the spirit of the place. The community center had been Richard Hargrove's surprise contribution, a complete renovation of an abandoned commercial building at the edge of the neighborhood, transformed into a multi-purpose facility with meeting rooms, a computer lab, counseling offices, and a large gathering space. Today, it was filled with people celebrating the official ribbon-cutting ceremony for the completed project. I still can't believe how far we've come, James said, joining Sarah by the Wall of Honor, where photographs of local veterans, including Michael, were displayed. From an eviction notice to this, it's beyond anything I imagined when we started. Sarah nodded, her eyes taking in the crowd of residents, supporters, and officials mingling in the bright space. Every time I walk through the village, I think about how close we came to losing it all. How different things might have been if that convoy hadn't shown up when it did. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of activity. After Hargrove Properties agreed to the partnership, things had moved with remarkable speed. The Michael Bennett Veterans Housing Trust was officially established as a non-profit organization, with Sarah as the founding chairperson. The VA matching grant came through, doubling the funds available. Local businesses contributed materials and labor for renovations. Veterans organizations provided volunteers for everything from landscaping to administrative support. Properties were acquired one by one, renovated as needed, and allocated based on a carefully developed system that prioritized Gold Star families, disabled veterans, and those facing housing insecurity. By the end of the first quarter, 12 families had moved in. Now, 6 months later, the village included 38 units housing over 70 residents, with plans for expansion into adjacent neighborhoods. "Mrs. Bennett," a voice called, interrupting her thoughts. Senator Howard approached, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in his 70s whom Sarah didn't recognize. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. This is General William Cartwright, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff," the senator said. "He specifically requested to attend today's ceremony." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise as she shook the general's hand. "It's an honor, sir. I had no idea you were coming." General Cartwright smiled warmly. "The honor is mine, Mrs. Bennett. What you've accomplished here is exactly the kind of community support our service members and their families deserve. I've been following your story since those first news reports about the military convoy." "That wasn't my doing," Sarah admitted. "Captain Wilson and Colonel Martinez organized that response." "But you were the catalyst," the general replied. "Your refusal to be displaced, your vision of what this community could become, that's what inspired their actions and everything that followed." Before Sarah could respond, the ceremony coordinator signaled that it was time to begin the formal program. The crowd moved toward the rows of chairs facing a small stage where a podium had been set up. Richard Hargrove, looking more relaxed and approachable than Sarah had ever seen him, served as master of ceremonies. Gone was the cold corporate demeanor he had displayed during their first meeting. In its place was a man who seemed genuinely invested in the project's success. "Welcome to the official dedication of the Michael Bennett Veterans Village," Richard began, his voice carrying across the packed room. 6 months ago, many of us gathered a few blocks from here under very different circumstances. What began as a confrontation has evolved into one of the most rewarding partnerships I've experienced in my 30 years of property development. He gestured toward Sarah in the front row. "Mrs. Sarah Bennett taught us all a powerful lesson about standing your ground when something truly matters. Her refusal to be evicted from the home where she raised her son, Marine Staff Sergeant Michael Bennett, sparked a movement that has transformed not just this neighborhood, but our understanding of what community development can and should be." Richard outlined the journey from conflict to collaboration, acknowledging the critical role played by the veterans who had organized the blockade and the political leaders who had helped secure funding and support. Then he introduced the various speakers who would share perspectives on the project's significance. Congressman Matthews spoke about legislative initiatives inspired by the Michael Bennett Veterans Village, now moving through Congress with bipartisan support. Dr. Wright from the VA described how the village had become a model for similar projects in 5 other states. Colonel Martinez, now retired and serving as the Trust's security director, shared stories of the residents whose lives had been changed by finding stable housing in a supportive community. Finally, it was Sarah's turn to speak. As she approached the podium, she felt a familiar flutter of nervousness, but it was overshadowed by a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore, or even just about Michael. It was about all the lives that had been and would be touched by what they had created together. "When I received an eviction notice 6 months ago," she began, "I thought I was fighting to keep the walls that held my memories. What I didn't understand then was that the true legacy of my son's service wasn't contained in a building. It lived in the bonds he formed, the lives he touched, and the example he set of putting others before himself." Sarah gestured to the crowded room. "Look around you. Veterans who were once homeless now have safe, affordable housing. Military families facing deployment have a supportive community surrounding them. Gold Star families like mine have a place. where their loved ones' sacrifices are remembered and honored every day. This is Michael's true memorial, not a stone or a plaque, but a living, thriving community built on the values he embodied. She acknowledged the many partners who had made the village possible: Hargrove Properties, government agencies, veterans, organizations, local businesses, and individual donors. None of us could have accomplished this alone, she emphasized. Just as our military strength comes from unity of purpose, the Michael Bennett Veterans Village demonstrates what we can achieve when we recognize that we're all part of something larger than ourselves. Sarah concluded by announcing the Trust's plans for expansion. Today, we're celebrating the completion of Phase 1, 38 units housing 73 residents. But we're just getting started, thanks to additional funding secured through Congressman Matthews' office and a major commitment from Hargrove Properties' new Veterans Housing Division. Phase 2 will begin next month. By this time next year, we expect to double our capacity and expand our support services. The applause was thunderous. As Sarah returned to her seat, she caught Richard Hargrove's eye. The developer nodded respectfully, a gesture that acknowledged how far they had come from their adversarial beginning. After the formal program concluded, the ceremony transitioned to a community celebration. Tables of food prepared by residents and local restaurants lined one wall. A military band played in the corner. Children darted between clusters of adults, their laughter adding a joyful soundtrack to the occasion. Sarah found herself moving from group to group, listening to resident stories, thanking supporters, and answering questions from officials interested in replicating the model in their own communities. It was overwhelming, but deeply satisfying to see how many lives had been touched by the initiative that had grown from her personal struggle. During a brief lull, she stepped outside onto the community center's patio for a moment of quiet reflection. The late afternoon sun cast a golden light over the village, highlighting the improvements that had transformed the once neglected neighborhood. Fresh paint brightened the homes. New playground equipment filled a small park where children played under the watchful eyes of parents who no longer worried about housing insecurity. Community gardens flourished in previously vacant lots, tended by residents who had found purpose and connection through shared work. James joined her, offering a glass of lemonade. "Penny for your thoughts?" Sarah smiled, accepting the drink. "I was just thinking about how different this place looks from 6 months ago. Not just the physical changes, but the feeling of it. There's life here now, purpose." "That's your doing," James said. "You gave people more than housing. You gave them a community." Sarah shook her head. "We all did this together. That's what makes it special. No one person could have created all this." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching residents and visitors mingle on the pathways between homes. Many stopped to chat with neighbors, share news, or offer assistance with packages or children. It was exactly the kind of supportive environment Sarah had envisioned. A place where no one faced challenges alone. "Oh, I almost forgot," James said suddenly. "There's someone who wants to meet you. He just arrived, got delayed at the airport apparently." Sarah followed James back inside, curious about this late arrival. Near the entrance stood a tall man in his 30s, scanning the room as if looking for someone. When he spotted James, his face lit up with recognition, and he moved to join them. "Mrs. Bennett," James said, "this is Eric Whitfield. He was part of Michael's unit, but couldn't make it to the funeral because he was still in the hospital. He flew in specifically for today's ceremony." Sarah extended her hand, but Eric gently pulled her into a hug instead. "I've been waiting a long time to thank you in person," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Michael saved my life in Afghanistan. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here today." Sarah stepped back to look at him properly. "You were one of the 3? Eric nodded solemnly. "I was the last one he pulled to safety before the secondary explosion. He knew the risk, but he came back for me anyway. That's who he was. He never left anyone behind. That sounds like Michael, Sarah said softly. He always put others first. When I saw the news about what was happening here, I knew I had to get involved somehow, Eric continued. I've been working with veteran housing, initiatives in my own community, but what you've created here is on another level entirely. As they talked, Sarah learned that Eric had become an advocate for veterans' services after his recovery, focusing particularly on housing and employment issues. His perspective on the Michael Bennett Veterans Village was both professional and deeply personal. The genius of this model is how it combines practical support with community building, he explained. Most veteran housing programs focus on putting a roof over someone's head, which is essential but not sufficient. Here, you've created an environment where people can heal, grow, and contribute. That's transformative. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Cartwright, who had been looking for Sarah. Mrs. Bennett, I want to extend an official invitation, he said. The President would like to recognize the Michael Bennett Veterans Village at a White House ceremony next month. It's part of a new initiative to highlight innovative approaches to supporting military families and veterans. Sarah was momentarily speechless. The President? The General nodded, smiling at her surprise. This project has captured national attention, Mrs. Bennett. It represents exactly the kind of community-based solution the administration wants to promote and expand. The ceremony would include the announcement of federal funding to replicate your model in 20 additional communities across the country. The implications were staggering. What had begun as one mother's fight to keep her home had evolved into a national template for addressing veteran housing challenges. The legacy of Michael's sacrifice would extend far beyond what Sarah had ever imagined possible. As the celebration continued into the evening, Sarah found herself drawn to a quiet corner where photographs of the project's evolution were displayed. The visual timeline began with images of the military convoy blocking her street, continued through the community meetings and renovation work, and concluded with portraits of current residents standing proudly in front of their homes. Richard Hargrove approached, studying the photographs alongside her. "Quite a journey," he said quietly. Sarah nodded. "From adversaries to partners. I never would have predicted that outcome when you handed me that eviction notice." Richard's expression was thoughtful. "You know, in business, we're taught to focus on metrics, returns, quantifiable results. This experience has reminded me that the most valuable outcomes aren't always measurable." He gestured toward the celebration continuing around them. "The transformation here isn't just in property values or occupancy rates, it's in human lives, in community connections, in hope restored." "I've been meaning to ask you something," Sarah said. "Why did you really change your approach? Was it just the bad publicity and investor pressure?" Richard considered the question carefully before answering. "Those factors mattered, certainly, but honestly, it was watching those veterans stand guard on your street, day after day, with absolute conviction. It made me question what I stood for with equal conviction." He paused, choosing his words deliberately. "Your son gave his life for values he believed in. Those veterans were prepared to sacrifice their time, comfort, and potentially their careers to honor his memory and protect you. It made my focus on profit margins seem inadequate by comparison." Sarah was touched by his candor. "And now, you're expanding the Veterans Housing Initiative to other Hargrove properties?" 7 projects in development, with more planned," Richard confirmed. "It turns out there's a sustainable business model in creating affordable housing for veterans when you partner with the right organizations and leverage available incentives. We're not sacrificing profitability, we're just measuring success more broadly." As the evening wound down, residents and guests gradually departed, leaving behind a core group of those most intimately involved with the project. They gathered in a circle of comfortable chairs, sharing stories and visions for the future. Colonel Martinez raised her glass in a toast to Staff Sergeant Michael Bennett, whose sacrifice continues to inspire and whose legacy grows stronger with each life touched by this community. To Michael, the group echoed, their voices blending in respectful remembrance. Sarah added, softly, and to the bonds that connect us all, the invisible threads that transformed a single stand against eviction into a movement that will soon help thousands of veterans and their families. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and the community center had been restored to order, Sarah walked slowly back to her home. The same house she had nearly lost now stood as the heart of a thriving veterans community. The gold star flag still hung in her window, but it was no longer a solitary symbol of loss. Now it represented the beginning of something much larger than her personal grief. As she passed other homes in the village, she saw lights still burning in many windows. In one, a young military wife cradled an infant while speaking to a laptop screen, likely connecting with a deployed spouse thousands of miles away. In another, several veterans gathered around a table, their animated conversation suggesting a support group or planning meeting. Children's bicycles lined the porch of a third home, where a formerly homeless veteran and his family had found stability after years of uncertainty. Each household represented a story of challenge, resilience, and community support. Together, they formed a tapestry of connection that honored Michael's memory more powerfully than any monument could have done. Sarah paused in front of her own home, remembering how she had felt when Richard Hargrove first delivered the eviction notice. The fear, the anger, the determination to hold onto the only place where she still felt connected to her son. Those emotions had fueled her initial resistance, but they had evolved into something far more powerful, a vision of what could be created when people united around shared values and purpose. Inside, she went directly to the wall where Michael's medals and photographs were displayed. She touched the bronze star gently, remembering the official ceremony where it had been presented to her after his death. "You would have been amazed today," she whispered to his image. "So many people, all there because of you, because of what you stood for and what you inspired." The ringing of her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was James calling to check that she had made it home safely. "I'm fine," she assured him, "just unwinding after an incredible day." "It was something, wasn't it?" James replied. The general's invitation to the White House, Eric showing up, all those officials wanting to replicate the model. Michael's legacy keeps growing. "That's what I was just thinking," Sarah said. "When I received that eviction notice, I was fighting to preserve his memory. I never imagined we'd end up creating something that would help so many others." "That's how it works sometimes," James observed. "The most meaningful journeys often begin with a single step taken for entirely personal reasons. You fought to keep your home, and in the process you've helped create homes for countless others." After they said goodnight, Sarah sat in her living room, surrounded by the familiar objects and photographs that connected her to Michael. But now these mementos represented not just what had been lost, but what had been gained. Not just a heroic sacrifice on a distant battlefield, but an ongoing legacy that continued to transform lives. She thought about the journey ahead, the White House ceremony, the expansion of the village, the replication of the model in communities across the country. What had begun as one mother's stand against eviction had evolved into a movement with the potential to address one of the most pressing challenges facing veterans and military families. The landlord had evicted a gold star mother, 48 hours later, a military convoy had blocked his street, and from that confrontation had emerged not victors and vanquished, but partners in a mission larger than any of them had initially imagined. As Sarah finally prepared for bed, she paused by the window where the gold star flag caught the moonlight. "You're still leading the way, Michael," she whispered. "Still bringing people together for a purpose greater than themselves. Still making sure no one fights alone." In homes throughout the village that now bore his name, veterans and their families rested securely, knowing they were part of a community built on the values Michael had embodied: courage, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to leaving no one behind. His legacy lived on, not in stone or bronze, but in lives renewed and communities strengthened by the example he had set. And in neighborhoods across the country, similar villages would soon take shape, inspired by what had begun with one mother's refusal to abandon the home where her hero had been raised. The convoy that had once blocked a single street to protect a single Gold Star mother would expand metaphorically to protect thousands, creating safe havens where those who served would always find the support and respect they deserved. Sarah drifted off to sleep with a profound sense of peace. The battle she had fought had transformed into a mission she had never anticipated leading. But as Michael had always believed, the most important victories weren't won through conflict, but through connection, bringing people together around shared values and common purpose. The eviction notice that had once threatened everything she held dear had become the catalyst for a movement that would secure homes and communities for veterans and military families for generations to come. It was a legacy worthy of her son's sacrifice, a continuation of his commitment to ensuring that no one would ever have to fight their battles alone. In the quiet streets of the Michael Bennett Veterans Village, a new day would soon dawn, a day filled with possibility and purpose for those who had found not just housing, but home, not just shelter, but community, not just support, but strength, in the bonds they shared, and at the heart of it all, the spirit of a fallen Marine who continued to lead, inspire, and unite long after he had made the ultimate sacrifice for the values that now guided the community that bore his name. Thanks for watching this inspiring journey of courage, community, and transformation. The story of Sarah Bennett and the Michael Bennett Veterans Village reminds us that even our darkest moments can become catalysts for positive change when we stand firm in our convictions and join forces with others who share our values. Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more powerful stories of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things. Leave a comment sharing what touched you most about this story, or tell us about similar acts of community support you've witnessed. Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people who need to hear them. Until next time, remember that none of us fights alone when we stand together for what matters most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.